Here is a speech about the tabernacle. It talks about God choosing us, choosing the Jewish people, choosing the place of the tabernacle, choosing Israel, choosing Jerusalem. And what does it mean to be chosen? Let's see. And also choosing King David. After this was a speech by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1980. Here we go. After finishing the Holy Temple, the first Holy Temple by means of King Solomon, the Torah tells us, Sha'az Omer King Solomon, that King Solomon said, this is in what the book of Kings, right? In the book of Kings, Kings, right in the beginning of the book of Kings. Blessed is God that he spoke with his mouth, saying that from the day that I took my people, Jewish people from Egypt, I did not choose any city from all of the tribes of Israel to build the holy temple, a bayit, a temple which my name is on it. Right? Since I took the Jewish people out of Egypt, I didn't choose any one of the tribes. Now I am choosing David, Liot al Ami, to be a king over my people in Israel. This is connected to the first temple. Right? King Solomon built the first temple. King Solomon was the son of King David. So God says to King Solomon, from the day that I took the Jewish people out of Egypt, I did not choose a place for my holy temple. Now I am choosing King David. The Biurin, and this is explained, Shepatach, that it starts off talking about building the temple in Jerusalem. I did not choose a city. Baruch Hashem says, from the day that I took the Jewish people, I did not choose a city. And it ends, it says, therefore now I am choosing King David. What's the connection? Kasav Radak writes, Rabbi David Kimchi, one of the commentators of the Torah, Ve'evchar b'David, that I chose King David, Lama shehigdim, why did he choose? Why did he precede David? Lo b'charti ba'ir, why did he precede King David to the city? I did not choose a city until I chose King David. What does the Radak say? Lomar she'evchar b'Yerushalayim, to say I chose in Jerusalem. I'm sorry. Lo b'charti ba'ir hayolomar ve'evchar b'Yerushalayim, that I chose Jerusalem. And lo perish, it means shelo hodati, I did not make known my choice of Jerusalem until I chose David. In other words, God said, I chose Jerusalem from the beginning of creation, but I didn't make it known until I chose King David, that he will be the king over my people. And then I showed to King David the place which would be chosen, Jerusalem. Nit arti bo begoron arvona be'esh mina shamayim, and then like I aroused it in the threshing floor of Arvana. Now Arvana, he was a non-Jew and he owned this place in Jerusalem, and King David bought it from him. I showed from fire from heaven that I showed him this place. So here, what's we saying? That God did not make known his choice of Jerusalem until he chose King David. And then he told King David where the place was and where the temple was going to be built. And then King David went and bought that place. At first glance, that's not a sufficient explanation of the Radak. Why? Ki mi pashtut lashon, from the simple meaning of the Torah, what it says over there in the book of Kings, the Evchar b'David, I chose King David to be on my people. This implies she'ena b'chira b'David rak emtzai. This implies that choosing King David was not just a means, that by means of that, King David revealed something that was already known, where God chose. Ela but she'b'chira b'David, that God chose King David as the king of the Jewish people, this is a reason why he chose Jerusalem. That's what it seems to be. In other words, what are we saying? That God already chose Jerusalem. That's what Radak says. That Red David Kimchi says. That God chose Jerusalem. But he didn't let it make it known until he chose David to be a leader. He says, but that doesn't seem to go according to the simple meaning of the sentence. The simple meaning of the sentence seems to be that God did not choose Jerusalem. He did not choose Jerusalem first. That first of all, he chose King David. And because he chose King David, then he was able to choose Jerusalem. That's what it seems. This also, it seems, from what it says in the book of Chronicles. What does it say in the book of Chronicles? That also there it brings these words of King Solomon, but there the language is a little bit different. There it says, from the days, etc., that I took the Jews out of Egypt, I did not choose a city, and I did not choose a person to be the leader, Nagid, on my people. And I chose Jerusalem to be on my name, and I chose David to be the leader. So what does it mean? It seems obvious that the intention is to stress that the choice, chosen King David as a king, Elakan, but over here, that King David was chosen to be a king of Israel. Not just that King David was chosen to let the people know what God already chose before. Elakan, over here in the book of Kings, it stresses note that it says that the two choices are relevant one to the other. In the book of Chronicles, it says that I chose David and I chose Jerusalem. It doesn't seem to be a connection necessarily. But in the book of Kings, over here, what we say over here, that God did not choose Jerusalem until he chose King David. In the Zohar, which is a Kabbalistic book, in our Torah portion, it says, Hai Kra Lav Resha Seifa Balav Seifa Resha. It talks about over here in what it says in the book of Kings, it says the end is not the beginning and the beginning is not the end. What does it say in the beginning? From the time I took the Jewish people out of Egypt, I did not choose a place to put my holy temple. Therefore, I chose King David to be on my people. That's what it says. The Zohar says, the beginning of the sentence says the temple. And the end says that God chose David. It doesn't talk about the temple at all. It says the beginning is not like the end. It's talking about choosing the temple. And the end, all of a sudden, he pops up and says King David. It doesn't talk about the temple. The beginning is not, says that's what it says in the Zohar. Lav Resha Seifa, Lav Seifa Resha. The end of the sentence talks about David. The beginning talks about the temple. Doesn't seem to have any connection. The Chasiv lo bachrote. It says I did not choose any city, and then the end it says I chosen King David. My high am I. What's the connection one to the other? It says the Zohar. The Evcha B'Yerushalayim meboile. It should say I chose a city. It should say I chose Jerusalem. That's what the Zohar says. Not just that I chose a city. Ella, but Kad Kucha Brichu. When God, this is Aramaic. The Zohar is written in Aramaic. Kad, when Kuja Brichu Hu Iti Reuta Kamai Livnei Karta, when it rose up in God's will to build a city. Estakel Bakadima. First of all, he looked Bahai Ureshi in the head that's going to lead the Jewish people in that city. Ulabatar, and afterwards, Bnei Karta and Va'isi La'ame. And then afterwards, he will build the city and he'll bring his people there. Ha'ud Kasib, Lo Bacharti Ba'ir. Therefore, it says, I did not build or choose Jerusalem until I looked at King David, the Mahavi, to be Raya, to be the leader over the Jewish people. So we see clearly that according to the Zohar, HaBechira B'Yerushalayim, the choice of Jerusalem, depends in the choice of King David as a king. The Kadam that before God chose David, the Raya, to be a shepherd over the Jewish people, Ein a Bechira, God will not choose Jerusalem Jerusalem can't be complete. Oh, so it ends up that King David is more important than Jerusalem. It seems he's also more important even than the Holy Temple. I mean, you can't build the temple if you don't have a place, and you can't choose a place until King David. Yesh Lion, we have to look, understand what exactly this is. Shebechira, the Kodesh Baruch Hu, that God choosing Jerusalem depends on his choosing King David. Hine, the Zohar, and the Zohar, and the Maimonides says that King David, he was the first Messiah. He was, and we're waiting for the second Moshiach ben David. Hine, in the Zohar, it says, it says, begin the Masa because of the city, but called B'nai Masa and all the people in it. The Zohar. Kulu, all of them, Kaimim Baraya, they all depend on the leader, the Naig La'ama that conducts his people, Kiraya, a shepherd. The shepherd, Iutava, if the shepherd is good, Tavle, then it's good to the Jewish people. Then Tav Lamasa, it is good for the city. Tav La'am, it's good for the people. The Iraya, but if the shepherd of the Jewish people, Iubisha, is not good, Vailamasa, oil the city, woe to the, that's why they had a lot of terrible kings, the Jewish people. Hainu, Shebechira B'David, that God choosing King David, Paul is, this brings Tav Lamasa, that it'll be good to Jerusalem. Oh, so not only the choosing of Jerusalem depends on King David, but also the continuation of Jerusalem depends on King David. Oh, well, but Sorechian, we have to look into this. We have to look into this. The Gam in Bechira B'David, even when God chose King David, was after he chose Jerusalem. Yochola, it could be that the merit of King David would protect Jerusalem. Right? According to this, it could be that King David, his main thing was not to bring Jerusalem, for God should choose Jerusalem. It was to protect Jerusalem. But it even more, that it says, Rak al derech bechira b'David, that only by means of the choosing of King David, and it doesn't mention at all the choosing of Jerusalem. It seems that appears to be that the choosing of King David, right, in Kings, what does it say? That God didn't choose a city until, since the Jews came out of Egypt, God didn't choose a city. In the book of Kings, God didn't choose a city. And then God chose King David. So it doesn't even say what city it is. It just says the city. David, it says clearly. And it doesn't say Jerusalem, it just says the city. So this implies that the choosing of King David is not a separate thing from the choosing of Jerusalem. She'im lo yiyeh lo manig, that if there's not, it doesn't have a good leader, then it'll be woe to the city. Woe. No, but it seems it seems that King David has two things. Not only the king of Israel determines what's going to be with Jerusalem, but also even more, that the king of Israel determines, he is Jerusalem. God couldn't choose Jerusalem until he chose King David. The Bechiru Yerushalayim, that the choosing of God of Jerusalem, this is brought about by means of choosing David. Until it seems that the main thing is choosing King David. Okay, summary. From what it seems over here, that God choosing King David was essential, first step before he could choose Jerusalem and before he could build the temple. Why? Yuvan, we can understand this by starting off a forward, starting. But Tosfos Beer, an extra explanation, Begetter, Habechira B'Yerushalayim. What does it mean that God chose Jerusalem? Shehi Bechira Nitzchis. This is an eternal choice. Like it's explained in the Perush Mishnayot, like it's explained in Rambam's explanation, commentary on the Mishnayot, where it is here, 7, in Zvachim. What does Rambam say over there? Maimonides, what does he say? Kra et Yerushalayim Nachala. That the Jerusalem is called God's inheritance, his portion. Bigalal, because Kaviyut Kedushato, that the holiness is set, there forever. Va'aleh Omar, on it says, Hanavim, all the prophets, v'nachalato lo yazov. That's what the prophets say. What does it say this? Number 9, it says in Tehillim, in Psalms, it says that God will never leave his portion. Sometimes it says nachlato means the Jewish people. But here it says, no, nachlato, that's the place where God will rest. That's God's inheritance. That's Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be there forever. The feed kavar Omar, because it already says in the beginning, Ki Hashem bachar et Yerushalayim, that God chose Jerusalem, l'shchinato, for his dwelling. Ubachar et Yisrael, and he chose the Jewish people, lo, for him, yitaleh, for God, blessed be he, segula, as a special people. Omar achar kach, and it says afterwards, Ki Hashem lo yitosh et ha'oma, God will never leave his people, asher bachar, that he chose as his portion, v'lo oto hamakom, and he will never leave this place that he chose. Ukavar ba'er, it already explained the eternalness of God's holiness, the holiness of God. The Omer, it says, Zot menuchati, this is where I'm going to be forever. In other words, it says clearly, therefore God will never leave the Jews. Never leave the Jews. He destroyed the temple, and it says in Isaiah and all the other prophets, how God is angry at the Jews and how the Jews disappointed God and etc. But God will never leave them. That's the fact. He demands a tremendous amount from them, and no matter how much they disappoint him, God will never leave them. And Jerusalem, even if he destroyed the whole city, it's always going to be God's city. This is really what our politicians should be saying in the world. This is our argument for Israel. Not we were always here, and there was the Balfour Declaration, and we were here. That we have a history. It says in the history books and this. God chose the Jewish people. It says in the Torah. He chose the Jewish people when he gave them the Torah. Sinai took them out of Egypt, chose them. The Jewish people are God's chosen people. He promised Israel is given to the Jewish people to Abraham. God gave it to Abraham, gave it to Yitzchak, Yaakov. This is God's place forever. It's a holy place. The continue, we can see that the eternalness of Jerusalem is because that God chose it. And this eternal Jerusalem has two aspects to it. Number one, God chose Jerusalem to make the Holy Temple. Since that God chose the Holy Temple to be built in Jerusalem, Nesru Kalamakomo, then all the other places are forbidden to build a place to God. When the Jews were in the desert, so they built the tabernacle over there, 42 different places. They had different places they moved. When they came to Israel, they built the Holy Temple in 4 places. They built it, first of all, in Gilgal, and then they built it in Shiloh. It was there for 369 years. And then they built it in Nov, right? And they built it okay. They built it in 4 different places. But after they built it in Jerusalem, then you could never build it in any other place. And Shom Bayit Ladori Dorot, there will never be another place for God except in Jerusalem. But Zot Menuchati, this is my final place for Dori Dor, for all the generations. Jerusalem is the only place in the world that could be built a house for God, the Holy Temple. One reason for the eternalness of Jerusalem is because the Holy Temple has to be built there. Number 2, the holiness of Jerusalem itself. Because like the Rambam says, Kedusha Rishona, the first holiness is when King David made Jerusalem holy. This is holiness when at the time and forever is Jerusalem. The holiness of Jerusalem remains forever. Therefore, Makriv and Korbanos, therefore the holy temple could be built there, even though that there is no holy temple. Even though there says, this is the Maimonides says, even though there is no holy temple, there has to be an altar. The altar has to be in the right place. But it says, if there's no holy temple there, you can sacrifice sacrifices in Jerusalem. As long as there's that. So what does it say? That the Jerusalem, even without the holy temple, is holy. Like we said before in the Rambam's explanation of the Mishnayot, that the holiness of Jerusalem is eternal. Therefore, God chose Jerusalem as his dwelling place. From the words of the Maimonides, it seems, Shagam Nitzchis Kedushato, that the holiness is in Jerusalem because God chose Jerusalem. So 2 reasons Jerusalem is holy. Number 1, that's the place where the holy temple is built. Can't build it anywhere else. And number 2, the Jerusalem itself is holy, even without a holy temple. just in the Sefer Yad, in the Rambam's 14 books of laws called the Yad HaChazakah, he adds over there the reason that it's holy is because of the holy temple, and Jerusalem because Jerusalem is there. So the Rambam explains there's 2 reasons. First of all, that the holy temple is built in Jerusalem, and the second because Jerusalem itself is holy. Says the Rebbe, we can also look into this. To the holiness of Jerusalem, Maimonides doesn't bring the sentence Zot menuchote adeyad. He doesn't bring this. This should be this sentence menuchote adeyad. That's a sentence from Psalms. Zot menuchote adeyad. It's in Psalms. This is the best proof that God is there forever. Adeyad, like Rambam says in the Mishnayot, that it's eternal. But he writes the reason because the holiness of the holy temple and Jerusalem, because the Shekhinah never goes away. Why doesn't he bring the sentence? He just says, Rambam just says that that's the reason is because God's presence is always there. Also, we have to understand what it says. Lefi, Kedusha is the holy temple, the holiness of the holy temple, and Jerusalem is because that God's presence is there. And the Shekhinah never goes away. That from this it seems to be this is not only because it says in the Torah it's not going to go away. That this is what God decided. This is my holy place, and that this is the place of my Shekhinah forever. No, that this Shekach Mechuyav, this is according to Seichel, fact of business. The fact of business is that the Shekhinah is there. God's presence is there. Shekashem, just like, not because the Torah says that it's there, not because the Torah says the fact is that it's there. The Torah also says it's there, but says the Rebbe, no, even our human intelligence can say, Shekashem, just like that it's impossible for the Shekhinah, for God to go away, that God can be negated. Also, it's impossible that the holiness of the holy temple in Jerusalem, it's because of God's presence. Maybe you don't see it, maybe you don't feel it, but that's the fact. The Einu movement, this is not understood. Harigam Kedushas a Mishkan, it's something like, I'll give you the example, right? A man is a man, a woman is a woman. A man cannot get married to a man. Not because it says in the Torah that this is a man, this is a woman, because that's the fact of business. A man and a man can't have children. That's the fact of business. It says it in the Torah also. Also in the Torah it says it. Right? But the fact is that that's the fact. A man cannot be a woman. That's the fact. You don't need the Torah to tell you that. Maybe it's that way because it says in the Torah. Could be. It says the same thing as in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a holy place, not just because it says in the Torah. It says in the Torah. But because that's the fact of business. The fact is that the Shekhinah is there. You don't see it. You don't feel it. But the fact is it's there. This is not understood. Harigam Kedush is the holiness of the holy temple. in the desert was because the Shekhinah was there. And nevertheless, the holiness didn't remain in the desert after the Mishkan, where the temple tabernacle was. We don't see that since that the holiness was there because of the Shekhinah never goes away. Why is it that the Shekhinah did go away? When the Jewish people came into Israel, like we say, for instance, the holy temple stood in Gilgal for 14 years. And then afterwards it moved to Shiloh for 365 years. And then afterwards it moved to Nov. Why did the Shekhinah, go away from those places? The Shekhinah was there. I thought the Shekhinah never goes away. Maybe we can say the reason is like this. The Mishkan hasn't got the law of the holiness of the place. The holiness there was just the building. Since the Lo Kovua, it was not set yet, but it Nis'u Oto, but the whole idea of the tabernacle was that it would be lifted up and moved from place to place. Therefore, God's presence in the Mishkan, it doesn't connect it to a physical place of earth. But we have to look into this a little bit more. What? The Mishkan Shiloh. What about Mishkan Shiloh? There it said it was a place that was built and it wasn't intended to be moved. The walls were made of stone. And it stood up for 369 years. So this, if so, it would seem that it was set in one place. It says that he, Hayata Menucha, it says that there was a place of God's resting. Right? Like it says in Rambam's explanation of the Mishnayos. It says that the Shekhinah was there, it didn't have to move. And also it says in the Sifri, one of the commentaries on the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, it says Makom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the place where God chose, it was Shiloh. Shiloh was where the tabernacle stood for 369 years until the temple was built. So if so, God chose this place. If so, why is it not over there that in Shiloh, the same reason, because the Shekhinah was there? This and more we're going to describe, we're going to explain tomorrow. We're going to explain tomorrow. God will. Okay, so what do we learn up to now? God chose Jerusalem. God chose King David. God chose the Holy Temple. Which one was first? Which one is the most important? Seemingly, King David seems to be the most important one. That God choosing King David. What does this mean to us today? We'll find out, God willing, tomorrow.